What may have caused the death of Elizabeth I? Hello, curious people. In a time when everyone demands justice in the street, today we present you a story about the causes of death of Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I is one of England's most well-known monarchs, and she was the daughter of the infamous King Henry VIII and his second wife, the illustrious Queen Anne Boleyn, who was executed when Elizabeth was just 2 years old. Elizabeth reigned for almost 45 years and was the last monarch of the Great Tudor Dynasty. Her reign is famous as the Golden Age, for its blooming of the arts with the origins of Renaissance drama, and for producing the most famous playwrights of the era, such as William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe. Now I will show you the final years of Elizabeth's life and her possible causes of death. During Elizabeth's final years, with her health gradually deteriorating, close friends passing away and beauty fading, she started to suffer from bouts of melancholy and what we would call in the 21st century, depression. In 1590, the Queen lost one of her closest attendants, the elderly Blanche Parry. She was the Queen's chief gentlewoman of her privy chamber and keeper of the Queen's jewels, a highly respected position. Blanche had known Elizabeth since she was a child and was exceptionally regarded in her service, being treated as a baroness with gifts of material luxuries and land. In 1598, her advisor William Cecil, another of Elizabeth's close friends, passed. Cecil had been a devout supporter and confidant of Elizabeth since her youth, and the Queen was devastated at the loss of these important figures, which thus furthered her reclusion and rendered her out of touch with the court she once dominated. An unforgettable moment that would change Elizabeth's life would be the execution of her former favorite, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, on the 25th February 1601. Only a year into a new century, Elizabeth was compelled to execute Devereux. In January 1603, Elizabeth is visibly unwell and in an unrecoverable state of melancholy, and has decided to retire to her favorite residence of Richmond Palace. According to Tracy Borman's Elizabeth's Women, Richmond was the chosen establishment because it was where the Queen could best trust her sickly old age. During the Queen's final months at Richmond, she associated herself with ladies that were loyal, dependable, and who had been in her service for many years, women such as Helena von Sneckenburg, Marchioness of Northampton. In this period, Elizabeth refused to consume enough food or drink, and this led to her becoming physically emaciated. Her ladies were becoming exceedingly worried and tried to persuade her to allow a physician to examine her, but the Queen vehemently refused on several occasions. Only weeks later, Elizabeth was grief-stricken by another ghastly piece of news, the death of her long-serving lady, Catherine Howard, Countess of Nottingham, who had served the Queen for almost 45 years until her sudden death. According to court contemporary Anthony Rivers, the Queen loved the Countess well, and hath much lamented her death, remaining ever since in a deep melancholy, that she must seemeth to be overtaken. In February 1603, Elizabeth was mourning the loss of her friend. Although frail, depressed and almost 70 years of age, the Queen retained her stubbornness and authority, and she refused to rest and stood for hours upon hours. No matter the persuasion from her attendants, the old Queen would not take rest. Perhaps she was lamenting her impending death. The Queen's ladies became so worried they eventually spread out pillows on her bedchamber floor, in order for the Queen to sit upon, if she decided to do so. During these uncomfortable final days, the Queen became disarranged and disordered, with feelings of guilt and regret over the execution of her late cousin, Mary Queen of Scots. She began to be plagued by ghostly visions of people she had previously known, including the late Scottish Queen, and her throne rival Lady Catherine Grey, whose son Edward had a claim to the throne. It soon became obvious that the Queen was dying. Her ill health mixed with a delirious and depressed state of mind drew her death closer, and after almost constant persuasion by Lord Admiral Charles Howard, she finally made the decision to retire to bed. Not long after, with the Queen resting in bed in a senseless condition, the elderly Archbishop Whitgift was instructed to come to her bedside and pray for her immortal soul. He tenderly informed the frail Queen of the joys that awaited her in heaven. Finally, on the 24th March, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I died, and her body was taken from Richmond to Whitehall Palace, where it was held over for 3 weeks before her imposing funeral. There are a number of possible causes for Elizabeth's death. A popular belief is that Elizabeth gradually became ill and died due to blood poisoning. This could be through the use of the popular lead-based makeup of the era, which Elizabeth was so fond of. These deadly forms of makeup were extremely toxic and dangerous to use, and could cause death if continually applied to the skin. Another illness that deteriorates the body is cancer, which could have developed over the final year of Elizabeth's life. Her death could have even been a simple bronchial infection that later developed into pneumonia, due to the Queen's advanced age and weak immune system. There was no way for any of Elizabeth's physicians to give a direct cause of death, ultimately because they didn't know, and she didn't allow anyone to examine her, nor did she have a post-mortem. Whatever caused the death of England's Renaissance queen, Elizabeth's death was certainly hastened by her ailing mental health. She was suffering severely with depression and melancholy that led to her becoming isolated, and a figure far removed from the queen of her earlier year, and the icon we view her as today. In the end, I would like to thank you for watching us, and I would like to invite you to subscribe and like our channel.